Okay, I want you to try something real quick. Just close your eyes for a second. Seriously, close them. Now, sitting right there in the dark, I want you to imagine designing an entire city. We're talking a brilliant, sprawling city just absolutely packed with life and light. A place where the sunlight dances perfectly through these massive glass windows, creating, warmth and distinct shapes. Now, imagine trying to build all of that, to design literally every intricate detail of that light without actually being able to see it. Sounds kind of impossible, right? Well, welcome to this explainer, because today we're diving into a story that's going to completely change how you think about limitations. So, what if the best architect in the world couldn't see? Now, this isn't just some hypothetical brain teaser. This is the actual, real-life story of Thomas Thorne. Here's a guy who lost his sight completely, yet somehow, he managed to build a vision that was honestly brighter and more profound than anyone else in his entire field. And today, we're going to uncover exactly how he pulled that off, and more importantly, what his incredible journey can teach us about our own hidden potential.
Let's start with Chapter 1, The Architect and the Darkness.
To really grasp the magnitude of what Thomas pulled off, we've got to look at who he was before his world went dark. Because he wasn't actually born blind. Ever since he was a little kid, he was just obsessed with architecture. He'd spend hours upon hours sketching these intricate towers, bridges, beautiful homes. And as he got into his teenage years, that evolved into this really deep fascination with light. He'd study how it spilled into a room, how the colors shifted throughout the day, the way it cast shadows. It was his whole world. But then, right when he was 19 years old, tragedy struck. Just out of nowhere, a sudden severe illness completely took his sight. He was basically plunged into total darkness, the absolute absence of light. But for Thomas, man, it wasn't just a physical absence. It was a massive emotional one, too. He felt entirely lost. Think about it. He'd spent his entire life dreaming about designing these gorgeous buildings, and suddenly he's sitting there asking himself, wait, how can I possibly design a building if I can't even see it? It really felt like his life's dream was just permanently shattered.
Which brings us to Chapter 2, Finding a New Vision.
So, for months after losing his sight, Thomas just completely gave up. I mean, who wouldn't, right? He stopped drawing, he stopped dreaming, he basically just sat in the dark. But then, an old mentor of his reached out and offered this incredibly unusual piece of advice. He told Thomas, "Your eyes are gone, but your vision is still alive." Now, at first, Thomas was totally baffled by this. He was like, what does that even mean? How am I supposed to see without my eyes? Well, his mentor told him to just keep his eyes closed and really, truly listen. And as Thomas sat there listening, he started noticing things. He heard the distinct echo of footsteps down a hallway. He heard the subtle swoosh of wind passing through an open window. He was actually starting to hear the rhythm of the space around him. And that sparked this absolute game changer of a realization. Space actually has a sound.
And that kicks off Chapter 3, Building with Sound.
This was the turning point where the really grueling process of relearning everything began. He dove headfirst into spatial acoustics, which, simply put, is the science of how sound behaves and travels through an area. So instead of looking at a room with his eyes, he was training himself to understand the unique size, shape, and volume of a room entirely by listening to its acoustic signature.
Just try to imagine this mechanical process for a second. First, he'd go around touching the walls just to intimately understand their textures. Then, he'd use his bare hands to physically trace the exact geometry of the columns and the structural elements. And finally, he would just stand there and listen carefully to how sound moved, bounced off the walls, and eventually settled. He was quite literally building these massive 3D blueprints in his mind, relying completely on his sense of touch and hearing. It is just such a wildly sensory-rich way to work.
Through all of this intense, rigorous retraining of his senses, Thomas adopted this super powerful new mantra: my limits are not my end. I love that. He was adapting, he was growing, and against all odds, he was finally designing again. And honestly, developing that specific mindset perfectly sets the stage for what would become his absolute greatest challenge yet.
Moving on to Chapter 4, The City of Light.
Fast forward a few years, and Thomas gets handed this frankly unbelievable opportunity. He's asked to design an entire city center. Now, as you might expect, the public immediately pushed back. The tension was absolutely palpable. I mean, the big question on everyone's mind was, how on earth can a blind man design a city of light? People really doubted his ability to pull off such a monumental, highly visible project when, he couldn't even see the blueprints right in front of him.
But there was this massive, glaring gap between all that public doubt and Thomas's actual reality.
Because while the public was entirely focused on what he was missing, his eyesight, Thomas was just leaning hard into his unwavering belief in this multi-sensory vision he developed. He wasn't just designing for the eyes anymore, right? He was designing for the entire human experience.
And wow, his final design was just staggering. He mathematically calculated these buildings where the sunlight would enter at the most perfect, precise angles. He specifically used glass that reflected warmth instead of a harsh glare. He even designed the walls with these unique textures that naturally guided your movement just by running your hand along them. It was incredible. He created these spaces that felt totally vibrant and alive, even if it was completely silent, purely because of how the air and the sound flowed through the architecture.
And that brings us to our final chapter, Chapter 5, The True Meaning of Vision. So when this city center was finally built and opened up, the public was just blown away. People noticed that the light actually felt softer than in other cities. The public squares felt incredibly peaceful. He had somehow created this deeply, deeply human-centric space without ever once laying eyes on it. And I think this brings us to the absolute core lesson of Thomas's journey. You do not need perfect conditions to create something beautiful. Like, how often do we just sit around waiting until we have all the right tools, all the right resources, or, the perfect timing? Thomas literally lost the #1 tool of his trade, and he still managed to create an absolute masterpiece.
So what's the big takeaway for us here? Well, first, remember that true vision really does come from within. It's a product of your mind, not just your physical senses. Second, realize that your limitations can actually become your greatest strengths, especially when they force you to get creative and innovate. And honestly, most importantly, just know that there is always another way. If the front door is locked, go find a window. If your eyes don't work, use your ears.
Ultimately, every single thing we've talked about in this explainer today really boils down to one powerful truth. Vision isn't what you see, it's what you believe.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to turn this directly over to you. Take a hard look at your own life, your career, your personal struggles. How can you apply a new way to see to your own limitations? What's a perceived weakness you have right now that maybe with just a little bit of creativity could actually become your absolute greatest advantage? Really think about that one. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. And hey, never stop looking for a new way to see.